Here we sit on the border between North and South Carolina at a training session for activists, and we're going to talk about what we hope will never happen, what we sincerely are working hard to ensure will never happen. My name is Mary Olson. I'm with Nuclear Information and Resource Service, and you are?
I am Bill Fisk, former female worker and activist.
Okay, so we're going to build a scenario, and then we're going to talk about it from the perspective of many different angles, including questions from the people who are sitting with us, as to what would happen. What if one dark and icy night coming down the steep bank that you go down on US 25, just a little bit further south from here, a truck carrying radioactive waste encountered an accident that had already occurred with several tractor trailers, but it's a dark and foggy night, it's rainy, it's slippery, it's icy, and this radioactive waste truck is continuing to move because they are not allowed to stop on their mission and their goal to get it to the destination, which in this case we hope will never be the Savannah River site. On board is irradiated fuel, which is the most concentrated type of radioactivity generated industrially in the world, and certainly many, many times more radioactive, actually millions of times more radioactive than any naturally occurring radioactive material. So this truck comes upon this situation, attempts to stop, can't. Its impact ignites the diesel fuel of the other trucks that have already had their accident. And we're just going to put in there that there was sufficient force to just crack the container that the waste is in. Now, we know there might need to be an even bigger element to have that happen, but let's, for the sake of the scenario, say that there has been a crack in the container and it's now engulfed in the diesel fuel flame. Particles of radioactive fuel, not whole fuel rods, but just particles, are beginning to loft up into the high heat and be carried by the smoke. And we have people on the ground who are already dealing with the initial accident, who are now scrambling. Some of them have died in the fire that's ensued, but there's others on the site who are scrambling now to deal with the situation. And somebody whips out their phone and calls 911. What happens?
Upon receiving the 911 call, somebody in the hierarchy, usually the chief of police, sheriff, will then make a call to the county manager, who will go, "Oh no, this is not in any of our emergency plans. Therefore, I will call the governor." So a call will be made to the governor's office. It will probably take an hour to an hour and a half to get somebody from the governor's office briefed on what has happened. The governor will declare a state of emergency. Then he will call Washington.
May I intercept?
Go right ahead.
The state of emergency would not be called for just any type of material.
No.
But this particular type of material, even a tiny fraction of it leaving the site in the smoke, is what would trigger that level of concern on the part of a governor.
And Washington would then be activated because we would have the NRDC, we would have the National Transportation Safety Board, and they would then call upon FEMA.
And what is FEMA?
Federal Emergency Management Agency. And the reason they would call upon FEMA is that none of the before mentioned organizations, the NRDC and the National Safety Board.
And I have to do it again, I'm sorry.
Go
You're
right ahead.
naming my colleagues. Natural Resources Defense Council is not the same as Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So the D has to drop out of this story and just be NRC.
Yeah,
and the only reason I'm doing that is because I happen to really like two of the people who work for NRDC, and they should remain blameless in this picture, okay? So
a GO team will go from each of the aforementioned organizations. Now, the problem there is that power is who's in charge, and all three are basically in charge.
Which three? FEMA?
FEMA, the National Safety Board,
National Safety Board.
and the NRC.
Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Okay.
FEMA will win because FEMA has an organization. There are small go teams that are with the NRC and with the Safety Board, but neither of them have manpower capacity. They will send a team down to assess the situation. I've forgotten now the time from Washington to Spartanburg, but it's about an hour to an hour and a half on a Learjet. And then they have to get to the site, assess who is doing what in the site, and then, and only then, will somebody make a recommendation. Now, since the three organizations do not really like each other because Washington is a power struggle over funding, they now have to decide who's really in charge. Somebody will have to determine who caused the accident. Somebody will have to determine how much radiation has escaped. Somebody will have to decide how to mitigate the situation. And this will all take a day and a half, 2 days. In the meantime, the cask will still be leaking and the road will be blocked. Because you can't move anything till the investigation's done.
Well, but you might move injured parties.
Oh, yes, yes.
And let's take a moment with that, because injured, the truck drivers that didn't die in the initial crash or fire, the initial fire department, probably volunteer fire department members that came out in response to the initial crash call before even it became clear it was radiation, those people probably got contaminated. And if they weren't contaminated, they probably got a radiation dose that may or may not be life-threatening.
Not life-threatening, but then you have the emotional impact of that. If you want to scare a population, which is one of the things that radiation does and why the conversation on dirty bombs is so rampant, is because it does not take a massive dose of radiation to cause trouble.
Right.
So we would be contaminating an area probably several miles square. Fortunately, not populated excessively, but still there are several developments off of that road. Those people would have to be evacuated, which is FEMA's great thing. They would work with the Red Cross about getting hotels set up. But then you start having the fear factor that comes in, and this has been questioned on most of the scenarios.
But before we even get to the fear factor, we've got the ambulance carrying the people who are contaminated. They're going probably to Spartanburg or Greenville, possibly up the hill to Flat Rock. These are small cities with small hospitals. They're not equipped or trained to deal with people who are coming in radioactive.
Very few places are trained to handle radioactivity or chemical unless they are in a chemical area, or, I mean, Spartanburg would probably not be, whereas Columbia would, Columbia and Charlotte area, because of the location of reactors, or Savannah River. The problem is that it would take somebody to recognize what the problem was. So now you've contaminated the ambulances, the ambulance drivers, the emergency rooms, and all the people that were in them. Depending on the night, it could be a simple case of 1 or 2 people, or if it's a Saturday night, it could be flooded. Or if we are in the middle of the flu season, then it could really be flooded. And whereas nothing that we are bringing in there is major contamination, it's still contamination.
Still contamination, and it's what I call the Midas touch in reverse. King Midas touch things and they turn to gold. Radioactive contaminated people touch things and you have to have all that lead to take care of shielding it all as waste eventually.
And very few places are equipped to handle radioactive waste from clothing, medical equipment that's used, to patch up cuts, scrapes, bruises,